Hello everyone and welcome to another video from FlashJazzCat. And as you can see from what's on the screen, we're looking again at SIDE3. A very exciting new project which I spoke about on the Antic podcast, which was broadcast I think a week ago now. So this is the third preview, if you like, of the SIDE3 cartridge. And I'm going to take you through where we are at the moment in terms of features, functionality, hardware, etc. Alright, so here's the SIDE3 cartridge. This is the pre-production model that I showed you in a previous video. We've got the SD card there. This one's looking a bit beaten up, but I use it for testing. I've also got a Sony 8GB and obviously a lot of others that I've been using for testing. If you're not familiar with the device already, I'll run you through what's on the board. So we have SD card here. We've got the RTC battery, the real-time clock. Yes, that's the tiny little one in the middle there. We've got two modes of operation. So this switch here, much as it did with the SIDE2 cartridge, in one position, probably the lower position, it will enable the built-in SPARTADOS-X on the cartridge, and in the upper position it'll boot direct to the built-in loader. We've got a push button on the back here which will be familiar to SIDE2 users, and when we use this cartridge standalone, as it were, without an Ultimate 1MB, pressing this button will bring you back to the loader if you subsequently hit system reset. And if you have Ultimate 1MB, you then have the ability to launch fat hosted ATR disk images, and you can use this button to rotate or swap disk images in multi-disc sets. Every time you press the button, the images on the drive numbers are rotated by one position. So moving on, we've got the main FPGA chip, 2MB of RAM, 8MB of ROM, JTAG programming connector here, which you probably won't need because this cartridge has the ability to have the FPGA updated in field without a cable, so that pretty much covers what's on the board. Yeah, so the only thing that we haven't actually got ready yet, really, is SPARTADOS-X. We're still waiting for that and to get the general geometry of it finalised, but pretty much everything else basically works. So I'll pop that in the 600XL. I like to use this machine for reasons of ergonomics and whatnot, and of course I've got the cartridge doors which would short the bare board out. I've got them pinned back with a couple of compact flash cards there. Professional solution. So let's turn the machine on. So we've turned on the machine. The switch is in the up position, which will be the loader position, I'm assuming. Not that it makes any difference right at this moment, because we haven't got SPARTADOS-X on the board yet. But anyway, this is what you'll see, the loader. You've seen it before if you've watched the previous videos, but obviously I've done a lot of work on it in the intervening time. This particular card has all the ROMs on that I've used for testing, and that happens to be on a FAT16 partition, which we'll open up. So if you're familiar with the side loader on the SIDE2 cartridge already, you'll have no problems with this one. But of course now it handles cartridge ROMs as well as XAX files and disk image files if you have Ultimate 1MB in that case. Basic, of course, you may already know that you can run basic files. But anyway, let's focus on the new stuff, which is cartridges. Now, I think previously I did have one or two OSS cartridges, so that's Basic XE, Basic XL, Max 65, Action. And one of the most requested features, actually, when people who have, for example, Ultimate 1MB, and they think you can flash arbitrary banked cartridges into the space, which you can't. And one of the most common requests is, can I flash Max 65 or Action, and that kind of thing. And I have to say, well, no, you can't. But of course, we did have the interim and very inventive solution on the SIDE2, EB Guys patched OSS ROMs, which you can use with the SIDE2 cartridge, and it works very well. But anyway, that's all a thing of the past if you happen to purchase SIDE3. Now, for those of you who are wondering what CAR and ROM files are, car files are exactly the same as the ROM files, but they have a 16-byte header at the front which describes to the host software the banking scheme, the actual type of cartridge. So without that header, the host program which is trying to mount the cartridge has to take a guess from either the file name or the size of the file or the contents of the file, which the Altera emulator does extremely well. It has a good sort of heuristic approach to trying to figure out what kind of banking scheme a plain ROM with no header actually uses. The loader here isn't as sophisticated as that yet, but of course I will continue to refine it as we go on. Now, if you happen to hit enter on a ROM file, what you get is a series of suggestions of potential matching cartridge types. So what it's suggesting here, if you can read it, Type 2 standard 16K, well, we know it's not that. We've got Type 3 OSS 34M. Well, that looks fairly promising because this one above it, which I think is the same type in a plain ROM, in a car format rather. What else do we get? OSS Type B, OSS Type 43. So all those different types could potentially be correct here. It's very hard to tell. Is this one 34M? It does look to be the same file but in a ROM format. So we'll go for 34M and hit enter and see what we get. Hopefully we'll get a boot with action. And there we go, we get action, so we chose the correct one. If we picked the wrong one, it wouldn't have worked. Now, the cartridge button, if you press it and then hit system reset, we should go straight back to the loader here. Now what you'll see, which is rather unusual in the realm of multi-cartridges, is that if we go along to the mounts menu, and those of you who've used the side loader with Ultimate 1MB before incognito may be familiar with the mounts menu. When the PBI BIOS is present, which allows you to mount hard disk partitions, disk images, etc., these will be ungrayed out. These will be available in any ATR files, and disk partitions will be there. Of course, to all intents and purposes, we don't have Ultimate 1MB because it's all turned off. You can imagine it's not here. But what we do have is a new entry at the top here, regardless of whether you have Ultimate 1MB, whether you don't. We're running the cartridge in standalone mode at the moment. What we have here is the actual cartridge type that we've already mounted. Now, we've come back to the loader here, and you may be wondering, well, how come the cartridge is still there? Well, it is. Let me tell you, if we hit Control and R, or if we go along here to reboot, same thing, and we reboot again, guess what happens? Yes, we're back in action again. So it's still there. Now, if you subsequently want to run an XEX file, you want to launch an ATR, maybe that's not the kind of behaviour you actually want. You'd prefer it if the cartridge was gone when you come back into the menu. So we've got some ways to configure things here, that's no problem at all. We have the unmount ROMs setting here in the loader, and if you turn this on, every single time the loader starts up, any existing cartridge mount will be purged from memory and gone completely. So there'll be no emulated cartridge every time you start the loader. And also we've got cart warning, so if you mount a cartridge in the loader, or there's still a cartridge mounted from the previous time you had the loader running, you can enable this cartridge warning, which will remind you when you run an XEX or an ATR that there's still a cartridge present, and it might actually block the XEX because obviously a lot of programs require the cartridge to be removed. So I think that probably covers everything. So we still have OSS action mounted here, so let's swap the cards. So here's a handy opportunity to show you a card swap. I'll go on to that in a minute anyway. We'll pop this card in here, and this card has some XEXs on, so let's find something to run. Anything will do, I suppose. Let's try E-Type. Now, E-Type, it's more than likely that if you have a cartridge or emulated cartridge plugged into the computer, it's going to come a cropper when you try and run it. So if you press enter here, it'll say unmount cartridge, reminding you that there's still a cartridge there. And if you press cancel, if you select cancel, the cartridge will be left there, and if you press OK, the cartridge will be automatically unmounted, and there we go, we're in E-type. So there we are. Now you may ask, what on earth is the point? Why would anybody want to leave the emulated cartridge mounted when you run a different file type like an XEX or an ATR? Well, when we get into ATRs, I'll actually demonstrate why this is a useful feature, because everything can actually work together. But we will come to that later. Now, I mentioned a minute ago card swaps, so the prompts have changed a little bit at the bottom. I think things are a little bit more clear now, but you can still hot swap cards and things. Get out of search mode there. So just pop the card and put the other one in. Simple as that. And here we are back with our test cartridge files. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is DMA, which is direct memory access. Now, I think I mentioned this in a previous video as well, but I'll go over it again. DMA is a way of loading data into the cartridge RAM, or manipulating data into the cartridge RAM at extremely high speed. And it actually transfers actually occur at 1 byte per clock cycle on the Atari. So the Atari has approximately 1.7 million clock cycles per second. So correspondingly, the data transfer rate of DMA on the SIDE3 cartridge is about 1.7 megabytes, not megabits, megabytes per second. And that's roughly speaking, with aside from various overheads with reading fat chains and whatnot, that's pretty much roughly how fast we load cartridge ROMs into the cartridge RAM. So to demonstrate that, I'll go into Space Harrier here. We'll just use the car file, since then we don't have to go through the rigmarole of stepping through the different cartridge types that this actually could be. It happens to be an Atari Max, of course, but we'll come out of that and we'll use the car file, because the car file describes the banking scheme. So every time you pick a car file, providing it's supported type, of course, which we should have most types supported by the time we're finished, which should be in about a week's time, I hope. So anyway, if we choose Space Harrier, which is a 1 megabyte file here, you can see it says 125K. It's rounded the size up because of the extra 16 bytes, so we'll hit enter. So we're going to hit enter now, and of course bear in mind that the loading process is finished by the time the screen goes black, when the loader restarts the operating system, so you can time it yourself. Here we go, pressing return now, and there we have Space Harrier. So as you can see, loading cartridges is extremely quick indeed, and we use DMA for other operations as well. There's also a DMA copy mode, as well as a DMA SD card read mode. Sometimes the data in the cart or the ROM file isn't in a sort of a linear, orderly format. It has to be copied here and there in the cartridge RAM, and that also happens at the same breathtaking DMA speed. So so we've got, of course, XEGS cartridges, Ace of Aces. I think I used that one test before. And I always like to go back into the cartridge from time to time, back into the loader rather, and just test to make sure that nothing got broken while we've been adding all kinds of new things. We've got Williams cartridges here. What's a nice one? Oh yes, that's quite a nice looking game. There we go, Dino Killers. Okay, so that's broadly speaking a basic overview of cartridge emulation. Oh, of course, we can unmount any existing cartridge mount, just as you can with ATRs and hard disk partitions when you use this in conjunction with an Ultimate 1 megabyte, which we'll get into later. Because you just go to the mount in question, hit enter, and there's your cartridge unmounted, just like that. So that's pretty much everything covered, I think. So yeah, you can launch your XEX files, COM files, EXE files, BAS files, BASIC files, ROM files and car files, all from the standalone loader. And as if that wasn't good enough, if you happen to have Ultimate 1 megabyte in the machine, things get even more interesting and even more exciting, as I will show you right now. So if you do have Ultimate 1 megabyte and you buy a SIDE3 cartridge, and presuming you don't any longer want to use the machine with the SIDE2, because I didn't have room enough in the ROM to support both cartridges at the same time, unfortunately. I already had to remove the Z clock driver, that's the R-Time8 emulation. Already had to take that out. It's probably going to upset some people, but there it is, I can't do anything about it. SD cards need a lot more code to drive them than compact flash cards do. Regardless of the fact that I can write extremely compact code, there's only 8K of space in the PBI BIOS ROM, so something had to give, and that's all I took out. But anyway, so you will flash a customized BIOS. It may actually just be the plain BIOS with a special plug-in. I'm not too sure yet whether I'll have to make changes to the base BIOS, because not a lot changes in the BIOS, the main BIOS setup menu. But it may be that I can't do everything needed just in a plug-in. And apart from that, you will also no longer use the built-in loader on the Ultimate 1MB. We will again, likewise, use the loader that's built into the cartridge. So anyway, we've enabled Sparta-DOS X for the moment, and we've turned on the hard disk. These settings are kind of subject to change. You can turn the ATR swap button on and off. And I've got SIDE3 cart ROM. That shouldn't actually be grayed out. That's another bug which I'll fix. So let's hop back into the loader for the moment. I'm going to swap cards as well. I'm going to put the card in that's got ATR so we can demonstrate this. Yes, I like to save changes. And off we go. So this is the side loader as it's going to be with Ultimate 1MB support. And if we head along here to the mounts menu that I did show you before, now we can see we've got a hard disk partition on drive C, and we can access all of these slots again. And we've still got the cartridge slot, of course, at the top. There's no cartridge mounted at the moment. So let's demonstrate the swap button again. We'll use the old favourite Packerman Terrace. Just hit break there to cancel the search. Don't forget, if you want to mount anything, cartridge or disk images, you can press Ctrl and Enter. This particular one has a map file which just describes the drive numbers and the mapping points for the file. So what you can actually do is hit Ctrl and Enter, and it'll mount those ATR files, but not restart the machine. So there we go, so they are now mounted. We've got side 1 on drive 1 and side 2 on drive 2. So the idea is that we reboot the machine, it boots from disk 1, and then when it expects you to insert the floppy disk, side 2 floppy disk, we just hit the button there and it actually swaps them around. It actually shifts the whole selection of images up one space or down one space, or however you want to describe it. Of course, the button also works in the loader, so if we hit it in the loader, this is just an extra little nicety. I don't know why you would do this anyway, because you can also use Ctrl and S to swap the images in the loader. I just thought it would be a cool thing to have, and I implemented the same thing in the Side 2 loader. So we can press the button to swap them there. It shows you that the button works anyway. So anyway, let's go ahead and reboot the machine and run the demo. And it's asking us for side 2, so we'll press the button and off it goes, loading part 2. Now, with the button enabled for swapping like this, just remember that pressing the button no longer gets you back to the loader in the way it would on a standalone machine or when the button is turned off. If you want to preserve that functionality of being able to press the button, hit reset from wherever you are and get back to the loader, disable the button. Okay, so that's what you need to remember. So let's go back in. So the route back into the loader, as you'll be familiar with this, is to help and reset back into the BIOS, press L, and we get back to the loader. If you remember earlier in the video, I talked about the fact that when you go back into the loader, it doesn't unmount the cartridge necessarily automatically, and you can have the emulated cartridge and a mounted disk image and that kind of thing. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, if you think about it, what if you wanted to use Action with a disk image version of Sparta-DOS let's say, for example, and you can do that right here. And I think this is the only place you can actually do that all on one device. So let's pop the card in that's got the ROMs on it. So let's start up Action, or let's mount Action. Of course, as I said before, Control and Return mounts the cartridge without a reboot. There we go. Action is mounted. Let's swap cards again, because this other card is the one that's got my disk image of Sparta-DOS 3 point something or other. So we'll look for Spart. There we go. Right, now, if I press enter here to boot this disk image, I'd be very interested to see what happens. So we booted Sparta-DOS 3.2 and it went straight to the cartridge that we also have mounted. Isn't that cool? I mean, what more could you possibly want? If there's, please put in the comments below what more you possibly want, but I struggle to comprehend what more you could possibly want than that. So yes, and of course it's reset proof and whatnot. I can't remember how to get out of Action. How do you get out of Action? Exit. So what was that I just... Right, DOS. There we go, so back to DOS, finally. So we left Action, gone back to DOS. Of course we've got the contents of the disk image there, which is on the fat partition of the card. I mean, just if your mind isn't blown yet, you know, just keep watching. Of course you could load and save your Action files, compile to disk. You want to use a disk partition instead, an APT partition? Well, that's no problem. Alright, so if you thought that was mind-boggling, we've still got the Action cartridge mounted from before. I've hopped back into the BIOS here, so I'm going to boot Sparta-DOS X. So Sparta-DOS X is booting now. This is the internal Ultimate 1 MB Sparta-DOS X, but it'll be the one on the cartridge when it's done. So we've got our hard disk, hopefully. Yes, we have. And if we type car, we've got Action. So we've got our imaginary pass-through Sparta-DOS X cartridge with our imaginary Action cartridge plugged into the back, and we've still got access to the hard disk, to fat-hosted ATR images and any SIO peripherals you want. I can't remember how I got out of this. Here we go. So we go DOS and back to Sparta-DOS X. So something else well worth mentioning is, of course, that SD cards have a write protect tab on the side. So we'll lock the card and we'll pop it back into the device. So let's try and run RW test on the card just to demonstrate that it is write protected. So we get error 144 there, and if I pop the card out again, and of course you can swap cards in the PBI BIOS context. So if I put the other card in here and type DIR, that's that card, and I'll unlock this one and pop this one back in, type DIR on that one. And you can see it's a different disk because it has different partition size. And now if I run RW test here, you'll see that everything works because the card's unprotected. And of course you've still got the BIOS firmware level protection. You can mark partitions as read-only. You can mark individual partitions as read-only in the partition table, and if you want you can have the partition table write protected but all the user data areas of your partitions open for write. Highly configurable. I think every possible situation is accounted for there. Now on the subject of RW test, this Sony 8GB card, as you can see, it's getting write speeds of about 43-44 kilobytes per second, read speeds of around 60 kilobytes per second, which is compares pretty favourably with compact flash cards. Now if I put this Lexar card in, which is actually, this card it seems to be a bit fussy. It doesn't always like to be hot swapped for some reason. I think it's the card that's at fault there. We'll do a directory on that one, so it's automatically sensed that the card was swapped. It's reread the partition table from the new card. Now if we run RW test on this card, which is a 1GB card, we actually get better speeds on this one. We get 54 kilobytes a second on writes, and we get 62, well, nearly 63 kilobytes per second on reads, which is basically the same as a compact flash card. This write speed is actually quicker than most of the SanDisk compact flash cards that I've got. These cheap Sony cards, I wouldn't really expect much from them. I would imagine that SanDisk is probably a better bet, but the things are so cheap and widely available that you can't really complain if you want to go out and buy a few different cards to use with this thing. Compared to compact flash cards, they're a lot cheaper. They're absolutely ubiquitous media, and we've all got plenty of them lying around anyway. So to recap on the features of Side 3, yet again we've got 8 megabytes of ROM, 2 megabytes of RAM, a lattice FPGA, a real-time clock which keeps the time of day and the date with SPARTA-DOS-X amongst other things, and serves as a storage for the settings for the loader, the return to loader reset button, which doubles as an ATR swap button. We've got the mode switch, which switches between loader mode and SPARTA-DOS-X mode. We've got the SD card slot, of course, which supports anything, I would imagine 64 gigabyte cards, and possibly beyond, I'm not too sure. We've got DMA for very, very fast loading speeds for cartridge images. And of course we can improve on the features as time goes on, even after you've bought the device, because it's got a wishbone, as they call it, or as Sebastian Candle calls it. Big shout out to Candle, of course, for the work he's done on this piece of hardware. It's absolutely marvellous. It's got a wishbone programming interface, so that it can actually update the firmware on the FPGA out in the field without the use of a JTAG cable. And of course we can flash the ROM content, the loader, SPARTA-DOS-X, etc. Future ideas I've got, things that I want to add to the loader. I may have time to do it before the thing launches, I may not. We're going to have auto-run scripts, so that if you decide that you want to use, I don't know, Basic XE all the time, for a week, every time you turn the computer on, you'll be able to have a script on the fat partition of the card, which will automatically mount Basic XE when you turn the machine on, and when you say go into the SPARTA-DOS-X prompt and type car, the loader will kick in, mount the cartridge silently, and you'll find yourself in Basic XE every time until such time as you want to change or bypass the script. Also, the something I've talked about for a long time but never actually got around to with the Side 2 loader, for basically lack of space, was the idea of having file associations, file type associations. So what I thought would be rather a good idea, to save having to design a new user interface for every player, every music player or video player that gets written, is to have modules. So perhaps you could have vid files, and again it would be in a configuration script on the FAT partition, and you could just specify that vid files get opened with a player in whatever directory on the card. So thereafter the loader would display files of that type along with the default selection of ROMs and whatnot, and when you hit enter on one of those files, say a vid file, it would open the video player module without you having to do anything at all, and the video player would play the file and then go back to the loader. So you could use the same loader front end as a kind of a media box, if you like, for all kinds of video files and wave files and pulse width modulation files or density modulation files and anything you like. And there's plenty of space to do all this. It's just a question of time and me getting around to it. Obviously the most important thing in the first instance was to get everything working, the core features done, and we're just about there at this point. I don't know exactly when this will be on sale, I don't know exactly how much it's going to cost, but hopefully I've managed to get across the fact that it does pretty much everything that you could want to do in one device. And obviously Ultimate 1 megabyte owners do have that bonus of disk images and hard disk, etc. I have written a Side 3 driver, so Without Ultimate 1MB, you'll be able to boot Sparta-DOS X from the cartridge, use the hard disk, just as you did before with SIDE-sys. So I think the next video I do on SIDE3, whenever that will be the final presentation of the finished product, hopefully with a case on it by then, and I'll tell you where to get it, and I'll tell, obviously it's going to be from Lotharek's website, but I'll tell you where to get it, I'll tell you when it's going to be available, I'll tell you how much it's going to cost, and then you can just enjoy it. And as I say, if the unlikely event that there's any bugs or problems or things that we need to urgently add in the future, we can do all the updates in the field. No need for additional equipment, no need for JTAG cables. So there you are. So I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you found this one interesting. I know this is the third video I've done on this cartridge, but it's different every time, and really worked very hard, both Sebastian and myself on this, especially over the past few weeks, since we were approaching the time when the boards needed to be ordered in their final unchangeable configuration. So that's done now. I'm going a bit hoarse here with all the talking. I've also got a fan on, it's so warm in here, I've got a cooling fan in the corner. I do apologise for any background noise. So your core functionality of cartridges, executables, disk images, hard disk partitions, Sparta-DOS, real-time clock, all taken care of in one device here. And I think it's the culmination, it is honestly the functionality wise. I know I'm primarily concerned with the software side of things. I've been yearning for this functionality all in the same cartridge for all this time. Obviously it's very complex, it's a lot of work, but very rewarding when it works, and I hope it's going to be as rewarding for you as a user when you eventually get your hands on this stuff. I think it's absolutely great. I wouldn't say that if I didn't absolutely believe in the project. I wouldn't have put this much time and effort into it if I didn't believe in it, and if I didn't believe that this piece of hardware could realise exactly what I've wanted to be able to do for all this time. Nearly a decade, I think, since SIDE2 came out. Of course, SIDE2 doesn't have any cartridge emulation features on it. We've seen a lot of new and very interesting, exciting multi-cartridges come out in the meantime. Finally, we've got this, and it does everything. And so yes, I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you're looking forward to this. Please keep your eyes on the channel. Please keep your eyes on Lotharek's website for updates and the Atari Age forum. And with that, I'll bring this video to a close. So thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to be kept up to date with SIDE3. And hopefully everything will be ready soon. So thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye for now.